Okay, we're rolling here.
Okay, what I'm going to do is turn off the heat. This will be, I think, short, and it'll be wandering all over the place. In fact, it's almost nothing but side trips. And after 5 years of studying cosmography, we are now in the midst of studying cosmology. And we're in our 5th talk of doing that. And currently we're trying to understand the process of what we do in everyday life as a cosmological process. What we are in is it. This is it. Our lives are part of the work of the evolutionary creation. And if we recognize that, and if we can keep in mind of what we are part, we can be much more fruitful and we can be much more efficient in our growth. Because it's all about consciousness, and if we are consciously aware, much better for us. Unfortunately, most people are not aware of this as part of cosmology. And most people do not have any idea of an evolutionary creation. They evolve anyway, because the experience is enough to do that. But sometimes their life might lack a sense of purpose, and life can be pretty dismal if you don't see it as part of something greater. However, most people, after they've lived a few years, somehow over the passage of time and seeing things unfold, they do have a sense that they're participating in something very big. But the concept of what it is and the belief system that they have concerning it are maybe not the best. Now, in looking at cosmology in the way that we're trying to approach it, we're not trying to make a big splash. We're not trying to be grandiose. If anything, the attempt is to be more prosaic than that. We're trying to recognize that this is not a dress rehearsal, and what we are in is not a doctrinaire matter. And it's unfortunate, we do have to rely on accomplished mystics and what they have given to us, because sometimes we don't have first-hand experience of everything. And so, unfortunately, I'm not a highly developed mystic, and therefore I have I can't speak of it all from first-hand. When we look at accomplished spiritual aspirants, mystics, we see that they all seem to have something in common. And the thing that they have in common is equipoise. Nothing seems to distract their attention. Nothing seems to upset them. Even though they do care very much about life and what goes on in life, they keep their cool, to use the vernacular. If we're fortunate, we can see that happen in the spiritual growth of our friends. They are enthusiastic about growing spiritual, and they try to go at it full blast, but as they work toward attainment, they get equipoise. They're not driven or pulled off to the side. If we don't have that, If we don't have friends that we can see are growing, we have to look for reports from spiritual literature. And I think one of the best examples is the life and career of St. Paul. Early in his career, you can see that he's struggling with the desire nature, and he says, "The good that I would, I do not, but that which I would not, that do I." It's a sentiment that we've all related to. We've all tried to grow morally and have failed along the way. But if we look at some of his later statements, one especially is the statement where he says, "No matter what my state, I am content." No matter what my state, I am content. That's probably a really, really good example of somebody who has equipoise. And this is a man who had no peace in his life from the moment he had the experience in third heaven, because he was stoned and left for dead and traveled in foreign countries, almost died in a shipwreck and washed ashore. And he says, no matter what happens, I'm content. Now, there are a lot of things that can draw us off of our center, or that can disrupt our equipoise, but two things seem to stand out above all the others. As with many things, it is about egoism, and in this case, the weakness of character. Very often it seems that we do not meet life head on. We don't go directly at life. We overdo some things and we shirk others. But just having a power life where we do things at the intensity that they should be done, we don't do that. What happens is we overdo the things we like to do. And usually the things we like to do are the things that we're good at. And we shirk or we dodge the things that we don't like, which are usually things that we're not very good at. From childhood on, we've had favorite and unfavorite things. If you met other kids, you ask, what's your favorite color, what's your favorite number, all of that sort of thing. It wasn't, it's favoritism. It's not to say that all preferences are bad, and that we shouldn't form opinions about things, but it's a matter of good judgment. Bearing this in mind, with the process of perception, judgment, and action is the cycle that we're looking at now. This is something we want to keep in our consciousness as we look in detail at that cycle. We're not even going to get through that cycle tonight. This is the second pass on the same cycle, and I think there's at least one more talk, maybe two. The cycle we're talking about of perception, judgment, and action is a continuous cycle throughout our waking life. We're always doing something, and as long as we are conscious and even just living, we're using this cycle. It is second nature to us. And things that we have as second nature, we take for granted. And we're not attentive. This is the big difference between an accomplished spiritual person and someone who is not accomplished, is that the accomplished person pays attention to life. Sometimes it's little details, and sometimes it's looking at the big picture for what it is, or whatever. but it's a matter of attention. Now we're going to use the same example that we did in the meeting previous to this. Boring. We could use almost any activity that we do in the outer world, but this example is apt, and we're all very familiar with it. If you weren't here last time, the example is driving down the highway, overtaking another auto and passing it or not passing it, depending on oncoming traffic. The first step, we could start the cycle anywhere, but the first step we're using is perception. That is going from the outermost part of our being in relation to the world outside of us in. That's the perceptive half of the cycle. Now, when I was young, I was not always a good driver. And it was because of spiritual interests, which I liked, and that's one of those things you overdo. And I didn't always give my attention to perception. And I guess I was inward in a way that I was somewhat withdrawn. And I can remember driving down I-5 towards San Diego, going along at a pretty good clip, and thinking about spiritual mathematics and having all sorts of ideas come to consciousness, and I was thrilled. But I wasn't watching the traffic very well. I didn't get in an accident. If I had, it would have been very disastrous at that kind of speed. You know, there's no slowpokes on the freeways in California. Now, this isn't something that's singular. Entire societies have eschewed being outward and perceptive. There are philosophies that see the outer world as illusion. It's even been dogmatized into religions, and whole spiritual paths think this way. Now, when I ponder this, I think about that children's story by Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. It's a story in which a child has no pretension, is innocent, and because of that is not trying to believe that it's wise, because only the wise can see the clothes. The king has been scammed, and by making invisible clothes, and only wise people can see them. And then he goes parading his new clothes down the street until a little child says, "The emperor's not wearing any clothes." And it's something like that, just seeing things for what they are. In our case, what we're looking at is the senses themselves. Yes, there are optical illusions, not many auditory illusions, but all in all, our senses are really marvelous. Under good conditions, a person can see a match struck at several miles. And we can smell something in an atmosphere when there are just a very few parts per billion. That's pretty good sensitivity. If the mystics claim that the sense organs, or their precursors, are engendered in the becoming vehicles of consciousness ab initio, from the very beginning, with the creation of any vehicle of consciousness, within that the seed is planted for the ability to perceive or to be aware of the world out of which that vehicle is made. So that means that it's really important. And it would seem rather foolish to eschew sense perception. So this is one of those cases where religions and philosophies deny the obvious. Now, it's true that there is a lot of attachment to senses. People want pretty things or things that taste good or things like that. But attachment is not what we're talking about. We're talking about using the senses in order to experience reality. It's a matter of good sound judgment and being aware of what's going on. There are no substitutes. Now, if we think about it, we can understand that all sense perception is a matter of pain. Sense organs respond to external stimuli, and those stimuli impress the sense organs. It's either incoming light or sound wave or the pressure of touch or something like that. It still is, at this point, it hurts to look at the sun or to look at a stoplight or at some of those people that have those exceedingly bright headlights on their car. It's a pain to feel them. But if we're looking at a late painting by Monet, with all of those delicate hues that you can almost see into the ethers in them, it's a matter of sensitivity and things impinging on sensory cells that are felt. Now, it's taken millions of years to develop this kind of sensitivity. But nonetheless, it's still a matter of feeling slight pain. It goes both ways. The external world that we interact with is sensitive to what we give to it or what we put on it. So it's in full recognition of this exchange between us and the stuff of the external world that we have come to see, the mystics have, that to grow in the capacity to have waking consciousness depends on our experience of the outer dense physical world. It's a matter that is easily misunderstood, and there are a lot of philosophical issues about it. It is not quite a simple matter like feeling the pain from the impacts of the dense physical world wakes us up. That's part of it, but it's certainly not that gross. It is only here that we can develop the capacity for waking consciousness. Now, often when you put a statement like that forward, it raises all sorts of questions and conflict and differing ideas. Someone may ask, for example, isn't the desire world a higher, having desire world clairvoyance, isn't that a greater awareness? Or what about a baptism by the Holy Spirit or Christ consciousness? The answer to those questions is undoubtedly yes. They are higher states of consciousness, and they are desirable. They are part of our the intent of our evolutionary creation. However, the statement was made about the capacity for waking consciousness. Clairvoyance or transcendent awakenings are states of consciousness, but they are states of consciousness about what already is, not what is becoming. So it's the claim or the finding by mystics that what we are working through is an evolutionary creation. Being a creation, it means that there's something new. It's not the same old, and it's not something that's blindly feeling its way into an unknown. An experience of the transcendent spirit is an ineffable experience. It's an experience that is beyond our current waking earthly consciousness. It has definite qualities. There's like a boundless feeling of ecstasy that never ends. In fact, some people who are so attuned to having misery come into their life, it's at first unpleasant to realize that there's going to be no end to the unfolding into the beauty of this. But those feelings notwithstanding, doesn't mean that there isn't something new, and that in that state there isn't a capacity of more of something that is new. Newness, novelty if you want to call it that, is not an illusion. And it has to come from somewhere. This is how I understand it, which may not be very well. But we are spiritual beings. And as spiritual beings, we share the same universal spirit and the same threefold spiritual constitution as the macrocosm. Our deepest attribute in spirit, in the solar evolutionary creation that we are in, is called divine spirit. And divine spirit is all about power. The power of will, especially the will to be. Now, as such, it is about the deepest manifest consciousness available to us. In an evolutionary creation, when the spirit is projecting itself into the unknown, into potential, into the absolute, the divine spirit reflectively projects itself into the deepest state of matter, or the deepest state of materialization. At the stage of the evolutionary creation that we are in now, that is the chemical subdivision of the physical world. And, oh boy, in there, that power in the chemical region of the physical world, the power of will meets its greatest resistance. And its greatest resistance is because the cosmic root substance is completely passive. And if anything is to be held in being out of it, it has to be by a continuous action of will. Because something that's completely passive, where you have to control every little thing, it's more than taking care of a baby. If something is completely passive, this requires a lot of will. This is what we're actually in. This substance, this chemical substance of the physical world, is being held in existence by the will to be. Though holding it in being for all of us creatures, or all of us becoming beings, is where the will of the divine is manifest. That which is brought out of absolute is something new. And we, when we are in this chemical region, subdivision of the physical world, we are participating in the bringing out of that something new out of cosmic root substance, out of potential into reality. We're participating in that. We're waking up something that has never been waked up before. That's about what it amounts to. The only difference between us and the divine spirit, the highest attribute of the manifest spirit, it's a matter of scope. So what we're doing every day when we're doing sense perception or when we're interacting with the stuff of the world is part of a large process that is called the spiritualization of matter. Spirit being that which becomes consciousness. So, though we're looking at a simple example of passing another car, very big things are involved. And the awareness of this sharpens our daily lives. And it gives us purpose if we can realize that. Now, in saying this, we're not trying to promote a notion of cosmic masochism, saying that we grow in spirit by interacting with matter, and for us the experience of that external matter is painful even in the most delightful perceptions. We're not trying to be masochistic about it. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say that something is being born of pain. It's very good to look at it as a creative sacrifice. In fact, in terms of artistic creation, that's the way it always is. Because the dream that we have is never as good as the manifestation, but the dream has to be fulfilled. You know, I missed a whole section in here. How could I possibly have done that? What I'm trying to say is that the potential of consciousness that is formed by the willful interaction of spirit and matter in the deepest sense as an act of will, the impact on the external world and the impact of the external will on us, the ability for us and the becoming beings in the chemical world is called conscious soul. In the interaction between ourselves and the external world, the ability to take on these impacts gives us conscious soul in a way that we cannot get just by awakening to higher states of consciousness. It's like saying that the spirit is growing also, and that as the spirit is growing, the potential for its growth depends on how much conscious soul we have. And the amount of conscious soul we have depends on how much we give ourselves to the stuff of the external world. All right. It's probably in the notes here somewhere. I may even run into it yet. All right. Suppose we darken the room and pull down the screen and set up a slide projector. Now, if we loaded a slide, we could project it onto that screen. And the size and the focus of the image on the screen would be quite different if the projector were several inches away, or if it were several feet away, or if it were across the room. This is because the image is carried in the light. This is done in grade school experiments. You set up a projector and you put a screen there and you put a screen there, and saying like it's in the light all the way. Now, physicists tell us that the images that reach our eyes in ocular vision is carried in the light that is reflected off of objects. Mystics go much further than that. They claim that the phenomenon is more than just a projection of light. For example, other things are projected through the ethers. A common example that is given is if we have, like in these window wells, if we have plants and they transpire, the etheric form of the plant is in the water that is transpired. And if it's under the right condition, frost flowers form on the window, and the frost flowers on the window are little images of the leaves and stems of the plant. There have been a lot of studies that have shown that. I don't know what the explanation is from physical science, but the mystics claim that the life ether, the stuff that gives vitality to living things, has a great capacity for, or water has a great capacity for absorbing it. And so when the moisture comes off and transpiration, the life ether form comes along with it. Human beings, I am told, it's kind of funny, human beings, if I lift my arm like this and I'm sweating, I'm throwing off all kinds of geometric forms, which are the chemical forms of what I'm sweating out in the ethers. Now, etheric vision sees things much more completely than the dead light of ocular vision. It sees all of the forms that are in the energies that carry them. So, working through the optic nerve, vision is not limited to the sense organs. You know, like etheric energy comes out through the optic nerve, and if you see somebody who's in the process of looking at something with etheric vision, it looks like little laser beams are coming out of the pupils of their eyes. It's really quite interesting. It's even actually called beaming it. People back in the late 60s and early 70s used to talk about that when they were under the experience of LSD. They didn't know what it was, but they knew what it really meant, but they saw it as beaming someone. The ethers carry everything that's in the air at the moment. And those images come in with the breath that we breathe. And they're impressed on our vital bodies. And they remain there, many, many, many images, until something very remarkable brings them before the consciousness of the spirit, before the inner eye. Usually that remarkable thing is death. And things are not held together anymore at death, and things begin unwinding, and we see all of these images in reverse order. Sort of like watching a movie with the exceptional clarity and, if we want, all-inclusive detail. Sometimes one sees etheric events at the time of an incident, if it's an emergency or something like that. For example, other images are seen. It's known that esoteric students who have committed themselves to a teacher have projected at certain phases of the moon or under astrological conditions. Adepts project living picture images to committed students, and they strike the aura. And if you're fortunate enough, or if you're awake enough in the etheric body, you can see them. It's sort of like watching a cartoon or something of that nature. It has happened very, very few times, and I was so boggled by the experience that I didn't key into the meaning of it. And it was only later that I found out, hey, this is what's going on. Sometimes, if it's intense enough, We see the image as a throwback experience or a flashback experience. We see it again and again. We'll have much more to say about this in a much later talk, but for now, it's pertinent that we understand that perception is not just a passive receptivity. In etheric vision, the clairvoyant projects etheric energy in what some people call light. This is, oh boy, I don't know how to... In our situation of driving down the road and wanting to pass, obviously, since we're dealing with a ton of automobile going at highway speeds, we tend to put much more into the perception, so we are alert and we're awake. And we have a better image that is formed at that time. I think I mentioned in a previous talk that when the vital body is stronger, as in childhood and youth, memory images are much stronger, and that the memory images of older people who are enfeebled by having played out their vital body and not being able to restore it to full strength, their memory images are not so good. But all of this is a matter of degree. Perception is a matter of degree, a matter of low participation or a low application of energy. I'm sure we've all had it happen. You're reading a book, but you're not really reading the book. You're not aware, your eyes are passing over the letters and the words, but you're not putting it together. You're not giving yourself to what you're reading. That's an example that all of us have gone through. It's a matter of how astute we want to be. There are all sorts of variables in this. If we just had a very big meal, we may not have the etheric energy to put into something for clear, sharp perception. We're a little bit logy. In sex, there's a concentration of blood and etheric energy in the sex organs, and it's not so much available to us for thinking and things like that, but that's something we all know about one way or another. So this is why spiritual aspirants are trained to put themselves into life. Two people may have exactly the same experiences of life, and one gets much more out of those experiences by putting much more into them, by attentively watching, giving oneself to the whole process. This is the only life we have, and it's the only life that we have to grow through. After all of this self-application to perception, the effect of that is the perception is drawn into the desire body. And since the desire world is a completely different world, then either the chemical or the etheric subdivisions of the physical world, the laws and the experiences are very different. In the meeting previous to this one, we mentioned that the attention paid to perceptions in the ethers produces impressions of them in the region of impressionability of the desire world in the desire body. And the quality of the impression depends in part on the clarity and intensity of the perception. Thus, since most drivers are attentive, the quality of the impression that we get on the highway is likely to be pretty good. And it should be noted that the impressions in the desire world are not like the neutral photographic images that form in the ethers. Much different. Everything in the desire world is feeling toned or emotion toned. And the desire body of each individual has its own brightness and it has its own feeling tone to it. It would be fair to say that each of us has our own colored view of things. In fact, I have even speculated on artists like abstract expressionists and abstract impressionists, but more the expressionists, that what they are painting is not a blurred vision of their what they're seeing with the eyes, but that it is an expression of what they're seeing with their desire nature. It is a reality, so that if two expressionists were to paint the same thing, there would be something similar, but the abstraction would have different qualities because of the desire nature of the different painters. If we had full clairvoyance, our psychology and our compassion and our understanding of people would be a lot better than what it is now. We just toss things off without saying that there's something to it. It's already happening that greater awareness of the inner side of things is causing people to think differently. Even in such a simple thing like the very skeptical world of physics, where they're running into things, although I don't necessarily know that they're true, but they're close to it, but they're running into quantum principles like principles of entanglement and things like that, so that a bit of energy could be attached to something or relate to something on a distant star. That's pretty weird, pretty spooky. And so it's opening up a lot of minds. Now, as I said, there's going to be nothing but a whole bunch of side trips, but that's the way it is. This all brings up a very engaging topic: purity. Purity of the impressions without biased feeling tones. As we're going to see when we get a little more into it, the desire world is very moral. Now, in saying that, it's not intended to imply that there is some divine creed that we are made to follow. Instead, it is meant to state that the world of desire is basically a world of love, because attraction runs throughout of it. And that the manifest nature of love is a statement of morality, caring about other things, caring about other people. It's meant to be a concretization of divine love carrying itself out in the desire world. Within that love, there is a rainbow of emotional colors. We can't go into it now because it is not pertinent, and the exegesis to make it pertinent would be way too long for now. We discussed it a little bit a few years ago when we were talking about cosmography, and there will be other renditions as we go along, and I still have some from an old summer school that are available. So there are subdivisions within each world. And sometimes there's subdivisions within subdivisions, and the desire world is filled with so many strange places that it makes like exploring the physical world a very simple matter. So there are all kinds of scales of undertones. You could say this for all of the worlds. All of the worlds together are a scale of undertones within the original cosmic word that is behind everything. Or you could say that everything is a rainbow or a spectrum of the one light, the one white light, with subdivisions and sub-subdivisions, things like that. But it's kind of, you don't want to do too much of that because you become something like a mystical techie. Plato does that sometimes, and even in 2,000-year-old writings, it's not pleasant to encounter. Now, these qualities, the colors or tones, whatever you want to call them, are the embodiments, the emanations of divine beings, of gods. It's just not like there is a light that isn't living, that doesn't have character, that doesn't have being. The qualities have divine character, and they're rich in emotional experience. When we're speaking of beings whose emotional stuff is so attuned to the divine that they represent something like cosmic standards. It is like saying that those scales or those undertones represent a divine set of standards, that there is a perfect activity or courage, or that there is a perfect compassion or something along those lines. And it all goes back to the divine intent that is behind the creation, which may not itself be directly focused in the manifest creation. Sort of like reading the mind of God, where things are more perfect on a much higher level than when we say that the perfect circle in the region of abstract thought is perfect in the way that a drawn circle can never be that perfect. Behind the whole of the creation, there is that level of the unmanifest truth, and it is from that that the divinities that become the stuff of the worlds and that provide the stuff of the world for other beings that are evolving within them, those beings are in tune with them. I don't know. This is hard stuff to talk about. We're talking about beings whose emotional stuff is so attuned to the divine that they are living standards. We do it. We have people, they say, oh, this person is the embodiment of courage or something like that. Well, this is at a much, much higher level. And all of us are evolving in that. So we can look at the desire world as an enormous palette on which you have some of the basic colors, and then over here in this little corner you try to mix this color and you use some of the basic colors in order to do that. And that metaphor can be carried even further because the colors, all of the colors are alive as special blendings. It's like whether our ability as actors, as creative actors in the cosmic drama, to our ability, we take those qualities of the desire world and act them out. And sometimes we're hammy, and sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't. No matter what the metaphor is, it is inadequate, because the reality of the desire world is such that it is, it's so much that it just beggars any kind of description. Now, the human contribution to this is unfortunate. We have, innocently at first, but eventually intentionally, brought in discord and darkness. We've murkied the colors. We have emoted the antitheses of light and color. Now we're free creative beings, and it's available to do that if we want to do that. It seems that we have deviated so far from cosmic standards, so far from the divine intent, that we do not see what we do or the results of it and what we have become. It often seems as if all we want to do is satisfy our own desires and gratify ourselves. That self that always has to be gratified. Now, fortunately, there are divine agencies, the same divine agencies that we're talking about that constitute the colors, who work with us to get us out of the mess that we are in. They give us impetus in given directions, but they do not, will not, cannot force us, because we're free beings. They're active in everything from astrological influences to social movements, religions, things like that. If we are earnest seekers, the mystery schools do that for us. All of these helps direct us to reality, to the moral and emotional standards. For some who are all bound up in materialism, the form that is given for improvement or getting out of this is something like a moral creed. Thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. For some who are content with gradual improvement, something like spicing it up with reward and punishment moves it along a little more. Some people are more advanced beyond that, and they look for something rational like situational ethics or something like that. To aspirants to the mysteries, what is given is the admonition to purity. Now, most of us have come out of the straitjacket of dogmatism of religions or something like that, and a lot of those institutions are corrupt and outdated. This is kind of hard to face, to be told that you have to be a pure person. However, mystery aspirants are advised to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Mystical aspirants, or aspirants to the mysteries, are usually children of fire, children of Cain, children of the widow. And as such, they're questioning individuals. And this is what we're trying to get to. The first question that is asked is, what is pure? In this, we are all, to some extent, victims of the materialistic conception of purity, which means only one thing. For example, if you have purest hydrochloric acid, it is concentrated hydrochloric acid of reagent purity. That is a kind of purity by definition, but is not what is meant by moral purity. In fact, it's almost the opposite of what moral purity is, because that kind of purity exists only in isolation, and it is lost if you start mixing it with something else. I'm not sure that I can come up with a definition from my experience. I've tried very hard for moral purity. It's not a small thing in my life. It is something that is about, there's a moral character that in attuning to that archetype, we live in it and it lives in us. And its character is, I don't know how to say it. Its character is, it can't be tarnished. And if it's mixed, it doesn't lose its character. In fact, it is because its character is what it is that it is capable of mixing and giving the mix value. It's like saying blue doesn't become less blue because it gets mixed with green. The blue is still there. It's not gone. And the aqua or the teal couldn't exist without that blue to begin with. And it is, purity is recognizing that kind of a living standard in yourself that you can give to reality. If we mix all of the colors together, we get white. That is, if the colors are beams of light. If they're pigments, we get black. And so what we're talking about then is that all of the colors are indeed out of that one white light of truth. All right, to get back on topic. The impressions produced by each of us have unique qualities. We can look at a painting and say that's the painting of such and such person because it has the flavor, it has the color tone that that person saw things with. The tone of our impressions of reality, whether it's driving down the highway or looking at a sunset, are based on our own personal uniqueness. Now, it's exceedingly difficult, again, to put it into words, but it's not due to mixture that our impressions are deviant. It's due to lack of strength of character. I'm trying to take the analogy and carry it out in that way. If one is true to the color or to the character of the situation, it's not, it means that when we form an impression in our desire nature, that impression will be more true to reality. People who take things personally, especially if they're taking things personally, indicates a weakness, a fear, a direction in paranoia. Those are the type of people who always see things as being against them. And egomaniacs see themselves as against everything else, that they are dominating the situation. And it is those kinds of things that distort the perception, that take away from a true kind of purity. In any case, perception becomes impression in the desire world, and it is an emotional impression. And it's not flat, it has a dimension of character to it. Now, a few minutes ago we said that the strength of the impressions is found in how much the perceiver has put into the impression. Now we can clarify that. And that is not the determinant factor. The determinant factor is what one puts into perception. It's not emotion. It's not desire. It is self. In fact, we know that too much distortion, too much desire distorts things. I am an extremely excitable individual, and it's caused me a lot of unnecessary woe for not seeing things as they are. Emotionally cool and calm individuals are more likely to form pure impressions, provided that they are cooled in having the equal poise of spirit so that they can see things as they are and put themselves into them. So it's only when we can put ourselves into our emotions, which is why things were done in mystery plays. All of the initiations in the external world, in the ancient world, were brought into existence by people acting out lofty myths. And in acting out those lofty myths, they were able to put themselves into a state of emotions that was not personal. And in doing that, they were lifted above things, above the worldly way of things. So, it's only when we are intent on divine intent, when we have the integrity of character that we sense through divine beings, the hidden intent behind everything, that we can be pure and that we can form good observations about the nature of reality. Otherwise, we're likely to distort things, and we're likely to be distracted and all of those kinds of things. All right. This is obviously not the end of the cycle. In fact, we're not even done with the first half yet. So the next time we meet in February, we'll carry on from here, hopefully with not too many side trips. It was just one of those weeks. The talks at the end of the moon. Today is a very hard day to give a talk because the new moon isn't until tomorrow morning. It's just hard. You know, you realize that you're on your own astrologically, and you can't complain about it, but you know, it's one of those things again. You want things to go your way. You want things all to come out easily, and it isn't, the reality isn't like that. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying I got a good exercise today. In fact, I'm the kind of person that I even bought into that. I was born with the moon void, of course. And that means that for the most part, the stars are not going to push me. And if I want to get anything done or if I want to grow in life, it'll have to be my own efforts. Too bad I'm lazy. Thank you very much.